Hello guys, my name is Nick. I'm an ice hockey player from Wake Forest University, and I'm a beer brewer. I have a cerveza right here because this is probably my 40th take of the evening. And I'm an LSAT enthusiast because for me the LSAT was my opportunity to go to law school, study law and economics, and hopefully make marketplaces more just. And I'm sharing that with you guys because I know you all bring your whys, your dreams, your ambitions for taking this test. And I'm enthused to be a part of your progress to the score you deserve, and that's what's going to make all this worthwhile. Okay, so let's hop into what we're doing today. We're working on the logical reasoning section. I like to go about this in 3 steps. First, I look at the question stem. It's the one line with the question mark at the end. I go here first because it's going to give us a little bit of key information about the question prompt. Then I go on to the question prompt, which is that big paragraph of somebody making some sort of argument. And then from there, I go on to the answer choices. Pretty reasonable, right? Okay, so what are we doing with the question stem? We're looking for 2 key pieces of information. First, is the argument valid that we're about to encounter in the prompt? If it is valid, we're probably going to be asked to find the necessary conclusion or say why it's valid. If it's invalid, it's a little bit trickier. We're going to have to say why it's invalid, or we're going to have to find what's missing to make it valid, or we're going to have to say what's wrong and say that should go. Okay, and then the second thing that we can learn is, well, the LSAT likes to give certain question prompts over and over again. The one we're going to be dealing with today, you'll see probably at least 4 times every test. Let's get into it and see what it is. And once we know what it is, we're going to have a general sense of what kind of answer choice it's looking for. Here's what I mean. So reading the stem right now is, which one of the following principles, if valid, would most help to justify the sociologist's argument? Going to our first point, we know that the argument is going to be invalid. All right, we're going to have to justify it. We're going to have to fix it up somehow. But we also know that it's going to be a principle. So it's not an exact premise. It's not something contextual or specific. It's going to be a broad logical maneuver that's going to make this argument that we're about to encounter work. Okay, so now with those 2 things in mind, let's hop right into the prompt. Whenever we're attacking a prompt, we always want to imagine that it's somebody talking directly to us. It helps us anthropomorphize, make real the argument, take it off the paper and into real life. So we have a sociologist here who's going to try and convince us something, and we're going to agree with them or we're going to disagree, and we're going to be able to say why. The sociologist is saying romantics who claim that people are not born evil but may be made evil by the imperfect institutions that they form cannot be right, for they misunderstand the causal relationship between people and their institutions. After all, institutions are merely collections of people. Okay, so they're talking about romantics. Who knows who they were, what time period they came from? That's not important. When we attack a prompt, we just want to look for logical words. Things like, they cannot be right. They misunderstand the causal relationship. And then, my favorite part of this prompt is that little tack on they put at the end. After all, institutions are merely collections of people. That just sounds like a fact. Why does the sociologist feel the need to bring up that fact? Or, in the LSAT language, it's a premise. It sounds like it's going to be important. It sounds like maybe the romantics missed that fact, maybe they overlooked it, but because they did that, they cannot be right. Okay, so now that we know the romantics cannot be right because they misunderstand the causal relationship, and we have this premise, let's put it together and just get a gist of what this prompt is saying. Because, always remember, a prompt is going to be some person trying to convince us of an argument. So unless we understand what they're saying, we're not going to be able to evaluate it. I put it together in this little picture. I have romantics. They're saying institutions corrupt people. That is incorrect. We might want to make the inference that maybe people corrupt institutions. Is that necessary? That's our inference about what the sociologist might be saying. We might come back to it, we might not. But what's important to know is that romantics, when they say that institutions corrupt people, that is incorrect, according to our sociologist. All right, are we ready to move on to the answer choices? Not quite. First, I want to point out one thing that makes this test question pretty tricky, and it's something that test makers are notorious for doing. When we were at STEM, we realized, oh, this argument that we're about to encounter is incorrect. What was the argument? It was saying that these other people, the romantics, cannot be right. So we have an incorrect argument about other people being incorrect. That's kind of trippy. But the LSAT loves to do that because if you can keep that straight, you're going to be the person who's going to get the best score on the test. Okay, so we have a sociologist claiming that these people cannot be right. we have to make the sociologist argument correct and therefore prove that the Romantics cannot be right. Whoa, that's a lot of work. But we know 5 really important things. First, there's a hole in the argument. We're going to plug it up. We're going to plug it up with a broad logical maneuver that was not explicitly stated, but we're going to identify in the answer choices. We have 3 clues from the prompt itself. The Romantics cannot be right. It's because they misunderstand a causal relationship, a cause and effect relationship. And we have this premise that seems to be very important to what's going on. With those 5 pieces of information, let's now attack the answer choices. A. People acting together in institutions can do more good or evil than people acting individually. That doesn't really light up in my mind, and here's why. It's saying that people acting together in institutions can do more good or evil. Wait a minute. The Romantics were saying that institutions make people evil, and we're saying that the Romantics cannot be right. So when an answer choice says it could do more, it could do less, it could do good, it could do evil, they're being wishy-washy, and we're trying to deal with an argument that makes bold, black or white claims. So answer choice A doesn't really work. It doesn't fit with one of our pieces of information, specifically that Romantics cannot be right. So we move on to choice B. Institutions formed by people are inevitably imperfect. That's an alright answer, but it's actually missing something that's really key. It leaves out mentioning anything about a causal relationship. That seemed to be a pretty big part of the sociologist's prompt. So if there's not that causal relationship aspect, we shouldn't really be too enthused about this answer. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's really not incorporating everything we've learned. C. People should not be overly optimistic in their view of individual human beings. I would be pretty confident throwing C out right away, and the reason is it mentions optimism and pessimism. But opinions like that weren't mentioned in the stem or the prompt. So let's toss that one out. D. A society's institutions are the surest gauge of that society's values. Values, that's something else that we didn't see in the prompt, nor in the question stem, so let's throw that one out. That brings us to E. And at this point we might say, wait a minute, maybe we need to think about A or B more carefully. Say we're on the test, we're cramped for time, we haven't seen the right answer. Well, have patience, because when the right answer comes along, we're going to recognize it on a gut intuition level because we have that 5 pieces of information that are floating around in our brains waiting to be activated. This is my theory on test taking. So E says the whole does not determine the properties of the thing that compose it. Ding, ding, ding. This should light us up. Why? 4 reasons. First, there's a parallel in the answer choice and the prompt. The whole and the things that compose it. The sociologist was arguing about institutions are merely collections of people, so it's using that premise that we wanted to bring up. 2, the whole does not determine. Determine sounds like a cause and effect word, so now we're bringing in that misunderstanding of the causal relationship mentioned in the prompt. Third, it's a broad logical statement. Remember in the question stem when it said, which one of the following principles? That's definitely a logical principle. The whole does not determine the properties of the things that compose it. And then lastly, and this one's subtle, but the answer choice talks about the whole does not determine. It's a negative statement. Meanwhile, the sociologist is arguing the Romantics are wrong because they misunderstand. Negative and negative. The test will mix up negative and positive statements when they actually make sense together. But it's a pretty good clue that adds on to our 3 previous clues to suggest that this answer choice is the right one. So, say we mark down E on our test, but we want to be really sure that this is the answer choice that we want to go with. Let's reconstruct the argument in whole and see if it makes sense. So, the Romantics, the sociologist was arguing that institutions are collections of people. Premise A. Then he argues Romantics claim that institutions affect the properties of individuals. Premise 2. According to the stem, there's a missing premise before we reach our conclusion. Romantics misunderstand the causal relationship of corruption, therefore Romantics cannot be correct. It's kind of like a double conclusion. Let's slip in answer choice E. The whole does not determine the properties of the things that compose it. Once we do that and put it in right here and reread the argument from start to finish, it's like a seamless ironclad ship. It makes sense from beginning to end. If we were to do that with the other answer choices, and we're running out of time so we won't, you'll see that they just kind of stick out like a sore thumb, but number choice E fits right in there. Letter choice E. Okay, so to recap what we did today to get to the right answer, First, we started with the STEM. We got the two pieces of information that we're dealing with an invalid prompt, and that what it's going to take to make it valid is a vague or a general broad logical principle. Then we moved on to the prompt. The prompt gave us three key pieces of logical information about what the art sociologist is trying to convince us of. And then lastly, we moved on to the answer choices. We saw the one that we liked, and we zeroed in on why we liked it, and then we reconstructed the argument from start to finish, and we made it work. If that sounds like a ton of work and a ton of time, trust me, as we go through the practice test and we repeat this, which one of the following principles type questions, all this stuff is going to become second nature. That's our lesson for today. Thank you for sticking with me, and I look forward to working with you guys in the future. Thank you so much.